All right, let's dive right in. Today we're going to tackle one of history's most loaded and, frankly, most misunderstood terms: fascism.
I mean, what is it really? Is it just a specific thing that happened in the past? Or is it just an insult people throw at their political opponents? Maybe it's something else entirely. The word itself is a total flashpoint, and you see it all the time in these really heated debates.
So, to try and cut through all that noise, we need a really solid guide. And for that, we're going to turn to the work of historian Robert O. Paxton. His big study, The Anatomy of Fascism, is perfect for helping us build a framework so we can actually understand what we're talking about.
Okay, first things first, though, we just have to acknowledge the sheer confusion that surrounds this word today. Yeah, I mean, just look at comments like this one from an article in Bella Caledonia. It shows you how throwing around accusations of fascism often creates way more heat than light, right? It just shuts down the conversation. And that's exactly the kind of noise we're going to try to get past. All right, so let's do this. Let's go all the way back to the beginning to really get a grip on where this word and the movement actually came from. So the word itself, fascio, was first picked up by peasant revolutionaries way back in Sicily. It wasn't until later that Benito Mussolini grabbed it for his own movement after World War I. He used it to create this feeling of intense, militant solidarity among all his followers. And what this timeline really shows us is that fascism wasn't born in a vacuum, It grew out of the absolute chaos and crisis that came after the First World War. We're talking about a time of insane social anxiety, economic collapse, and just this widespread feeling that the old ways of doing things had totally, completely failed. Okay, so we know where the name comes from, but what is it really? How do we define it? Not as just some insult, but as an actual political phenomenon. And this is where Paxton's big idea comes in. He says we should think of fascism less as some kind of coherent ideology and more as a specific form of political behavior. It's a pattern, something you can actually recognize. It's defined by this story of decline, a call for unity, a weird partnership with the existing powerful elites, and, well, the use of violence for what it calls internal cleansing and external expansion. And this right here, this quote, gets to the absolute heart of his argument. If you really want to understand fascism, you have to look at what they do, not just what they say. A movement's actions are just so much more revealing than whatever philosophy they claim to have. So, how do they actually pull it off? Well, they tap into what Paxton calls mobilizing passions. You can really see the pattern here, can't you? It all starts with this feeling of overwhelming crisis and victimhood. That, in turn, fuels the rise of a strong leader. And this leader, they appeal to gut instinct over reason, and in the end, they justify violence, all in the name of the group's success. It's a really, really powerful emotional cocktail. Okay, so how do those passions actually turn into real control? Let's take a look at the path these movements take, from the fringes right into the center of power. Now, what's so crucial to get here is that fascism is a process. It's not just a single event that happens overnight. Paxton breaks it down for us into 5 clear stages. This shows exactly how a movement can grow from the political fringe to the very heart of government, and, importantly, what happens once it's there. And look, this path to power isn't some simple one-size-fits-all formula. It really depends on what's going on in a specific country, especially if there's a crisis. Mussolini, for instance, he rode that first chaotic wave right after the war. But Hitler? His first attempt was a total failure. He only got his chance a decade later when a new crisis, the Great Depression, created the perfect storm for him. And here's a really key step on that path to power, and it's often a fatal miscalculation made by the traditional elites. They look at these movements and see them as useful tools, right? They think, hey, we can harness all that popular energy and then control them. So they invite them into the government, totally believing they're the ones holding the reins. Okay, so now that we're armed with this historical and behavioral framework, let's circle all the way back to those modern arguments we looked at in the beginning. The source material we're looking at really highlights a passionate debate over this exact question. And honestly, it's a perfect test case for the framework we've just built. When you look at the arguments through Paxton's lens, you can see this fundamental split. On one hand, you have people focusing on a rational political goal, right? Take back control. But the other side argues that the real game changer was that emotional undercurrent, those mobilizing passions of xenophobia and a sense of victimhood. And the source material also gets into another really complex debate. How do we apply this framework to specific leaders today? especially when they don't neatly fit the historical mold we might have in our heads. And this is where it gets really tricky, right? Paxton's framework shows us that fascism absolutely needs a demonized enemy. But, and this is a big but, that enemy can change. It depends on the national culture. So the real question isn't, is this leader personally anti-Semitic? The better question is, does their political behavior rely on targeting some demonized other, no matter who that other happens to be?
So you can see that what we're doing here isn't about giving you a simple yes or no label for things. Instead, what we've built is more like a toolkit for your own analysis, a kind of checklist of behaviors to watch out for.
So these are the key behavioral patterns Paxton tells us to look for. And it's so important to remember, it's not about specific symbols or what color shirts people are wearing. It's about this very distinct combination of political actions and those mobilizing passions we keep coming back to. So, in the end, Paxton's framework doesn't give us easy answers or simple labels we can just slap onto people or movements. But what it does do is equip us to ask the right questions, and much more precise questions at that. It helps us move away from just using fascism as an insult and toward using it as a sharp analytical tool to better understand the world we're living in.